أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه أمسينا وأمسى الملك لله والحمد لله لا شريك له لا إله إلا هو وإليه المصير اللهم ما أمسى بنا من نعمة وبأحد من خلقك فمنك وحدك لا شريك لك فلك الحمد ولك الشكر. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Where did we stop last time? Who remembers? The big fitna. That's where we started actually. We started the discussing the big fitna. And if you remember, what happened is that that was instigated actually by some people that used to hate Islam more than anything else. So some people, specifically there was one person named Abdullah ibn Saba. And Abdullah ibn Saba, basically he was known to be actually a Jew from Sana'a that pretended to be a Muslim. And he knew that the only way he could basically affect or the situation of the Muslims is by coming from within, by attacking from within. So that's when he started basically instigating problem and spreading some rumors and some misinformation specifically about Authman bin Affan radiyallahu anhu. And the things that they were criticizing Authman bin Affan for, they can be listed, among some of the other things, but the major ones, the first one is the fact that he appointed his relatives as wulat, as people that were leaders and in charge. So he appointed basically his relatives as in charge. And that's something that he was criticized for. And if you look at the people that he appointed as walis or wulat actually in the different areas, those are mainly actually 5. And those of course were Muawiyah bin Abu Sufyan alayhi radwanillah. The second one, Abdullah ibn Abi Sarh, Abdullah ibn Sa'd ibn Abi Sarh, Al-Walid ibn Uqba, Sa'id ibn al-As, Abdullah ibn Amir. And these are the 5 people that he appointed as walis, and they were not basically leaders at the same time, but at different times. Versus the other walis that actually he appointed. If you look at the other ones that he appointed, those were Abu Musa al-Ash'ari, Al-Qa'qa' ibn Amr al-Tamimi, Jabir al-Muzni, Habib bin Maslama, Abdul Rahman bin Khalid ibn al-Walid, Abu al-A'war al-Salmi, Hakim ibn Salama, Al-Ash'ath ibn Qais, Jarir ibn Abdullah al-Bujali, Utayba ibn Nuhas, Malik ibn Habib, Al-Nasir al-Ujli, Al-Sa'ib ibn al-Aqra', Sa'id ibn Qais, Salman ibn Rabi'a, Khunais bin Khubaysh. So you can see easily that the ones that come from Banu Umayyah actually constitute a very small number and percentage of the larger number of the walis that he appointed. Not only that, but as Ibn Taymiyyah alayhi radwanillah said that even at the time of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam, that the one tribe that had the most workers appointed by the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam was Banu Umayyah itself. And the reason for that, first because there were many in numbers, and they were known to be honorable and then great leader and then prominent figures. And the Prophet ﷺ himself had appointed 5 from Banu Umayyah into prominent leadership positions. So what Uthman bin Affan ﷺ did is something similar. It's not really something far from that. And when Uthman bin Affan ﷺ died, then the people from Banu Umayyah that were in charge were only 3 of them. So of all the people that he had, and those are Muawiyah, Abdullah ibn Sa'd ibn Abi Sarh, and Abdullah ibn Amir ibn Qurayz. Only these 3. So that's why, but subhanAllah, whenever you want to attack or criticize something, you can easily twist it the way you want. Like in Arabic, they said that if you have a cup that has basically a holder, they said you can turn it however you want. You can say this is on the right, or you can say no, this is on the left. So that's exactly actually what was happening, focusing on something that was already existent at the time of the Prophet ﷺ. The other thing that they were criticizing him for is the fact, or as they claim, that he basically took Abu Dharr al-Ghifari alayhi radwanillah, or he sent him into exile into a place called al-Rabada. And this was narrated in Tariq al-Tabari, by the way. And as we discussed briefly earlier about Tariq al-Tabari, we said that Tariq al-Tabari is not the most credible source when it comes to Islamic history. This is not to discredit al-Tabari himself, alayhi radwanillah, but al-Tabari basically documented or reported everything that he could put his hands on. And also, but what he did at the same time is that he cited. So he put the reference or the source of his information. So anyway, he put the source. It is up to you to take it and to verify it. That's why some scholars came after him and they took whatever materials he has and they screened it and they canceled some of them. So the story that's actually mentioned in the Tabari, it indicated basically that there was an argument happening between Muawiyah and Abu Dharr, which led basically into kicking Abu Dharr out, describing it almost in this brutal way. And then when he was sent to Medina, then Uthman bin Affan alayhi ridwanullah sent him forcefully into exile. But the story that was mentioned in Bukhari was something totally different. The story that was mentioned in Bukhari is something that actually narrated by Abu Dharr himself, alayhi ridwanullah, where he said that there was an argument between him and Muawiyah bin Abu Sufyan, and the reason is on what's called kanz al-dhahab wal-fidda, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says basically that you do not basically hold al-dhahab and al-fidda as kanz. And here this is a known argument between Abu Dharr and all the other Sahaba alayhim ridwanullah. Abu Dharr al-Ghifari used to say that anything that is beyond your need of your wealth, it is considered to be kanz. In other words, something that you amass that you do not need, and Allah will punish you for that. But the Sahaba alayhim ridwanullah, all the other Sahaba, they said, no, it is not considered to be kanz so long as you are paying the zakat for that. And Abu Dharr al-Ghifari alayhi ridwanullah was known to be very vocal, very outspoken. And because of that, he started basically speaking against, especially knowing that the Levantine area was known to be living in a lot of, in luxury and having a lot of wealth. So basically, this started to instigate certain problems because of the argument that Abu Dharr actually was spreading. And Muawiyah alayhi ridwanullah sent a complaint to Uthman bin Affan that the situation is getting worse, do something about it. Then Uthman bin Affan sent Abu Dharr al-Ghifari alayhi ridwanullah to Medina because of that. And Abu Dharr said, this is narrated by the way in Bukhari by Abu Dharr al-Ghifari, and Abu Dharr said that when I entered Medina, then everybody started flocking toward me, started basically coming toward me in large numbers, until it became difficult for me, so I complained to Uthman bin Affan, and Uthman bin Affan gave me the option of either staying in Medina or going to an isolated place, basically, where I will be protected from that. And that's what Abu Dharr chose, alayhi ridwanullah, to go into a place called Al-Rabada, which is on the outskirts of Medina. And Abu Dharr alayhi ridwanullah had heard the Prophet saying to him that إِذَا بَلَغَ الْبِنَاءُ سِلْعًا فَخْرُجْ مِنْهَا, that when the buildings started basically rising or something like that, then leave Medina. And also he know the Prophet ﷺ famous hadith that we discuss if we mention in the Ghazwat Tabuk, where he followed the whole army by himself. And the Prophet ﷺ, when he saw Abu Dharr, he said, رحم الله أبو ذر يمشي وحيدا ويموت وحيدا ويبعث وحيدا. That may Allah have mercy on Abu Dharr. He will walk by himself, and he will die by himself, and he will be resurrected by himself. Praising him alayhi salatu wasalam. And that's what Abu Dharr actually went in there. The other thing that they criticize Uthman bin Affan for is the fact that he burned the masahif, he burned the Qur'ans at that, not the Qur'an, the masahif, the copies of the Qur'an at that time. And if you remember, we discussed that when we spoke about the compilation of the Qur'an at the time of Abu Bakr as-Siddiq alayhi ridwanullah, that with the spread of the Islamic Khilafah at the time of Uthman bin Affan, people started writing their own copies of the Qur'an. And as they were writing it as such, they started making all sorts of mistakes. And Allah Sami'un Alim becomes an Allah Sami'un Basir, for example. And changing the order of the Qur'an and using the different tongues. And what he did, alayhi ridwanullah, to preserve the Qur'an, that he compiled everything that was written and he burnt it up. And he took Mus'haf Hafsa, which was compiled at the time of Abu Bakr as-Siddiq alayhi ridwanullah. It was left with Hafsa by then, and he made copies of that and he spread it. So this actually is something that Uthman is to be praised for and not to be criticized for, alayhi ridwanullah. The other three things, famous things that he was also criticized for, we discussed before. First of all, the fact that he did not participate in the Battle of Badr. You know, the famous story of Abdullah ibn Umar, if you remember, when a man came from Egypt and he looked after him and he asked him these three questions. That he did not participate in the Battle of Badr. That's the first one. The second thing, he ran away in the battle of, at the end of the Battle of Uhud. And the third thing is that he was not present during Bay'at al-Radwan, the famous pledge of al-Radwan and the Hudaybiyah Treaty. And all of that, of course, was explained. He did not participate in Badr because the Prophet asked him to stay behind and tend to Ruqayya, the daughter of the Prophet and the wife of Uthman bin Affan. He ran away in Uhud like all the other Sahaba, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala stated in Al-Imran in more than one place that He forgave them. He did not participate in Bay'at al-Radwan because the whole Bay'at al-Radwan was for him, alayhi ridwanullah, because the rumor was that he was actually killed by Quraysh. So anyway, of course, but when there's actually lack of knowledge, then the rumors will spread. So Abdullah ibn Saba and the people that were with him, again, thought that the best way we can actually get into the Khilafah or spread or destroy it is by getting from within. So that's why they started spreading rumors, these rumors that I mentioned, amongst other. And there will be one that I will explain a little further, the fact that Uthman bin Affan used to give money to his own family members. So they started spreading these rumors. The first thing that they tried in Medina, but of course in Medina they failed. Because in Medina there were the Sahaba and all the learned people, and whenever you have knowledge, basically ilm, then this becomes a protection. So they could not do anything in Medina. They went to the Levantine area, the area of Syria. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to liberate it. They went to that area of Syria, and they could not do anything because Muawiyah had a strong grip over that land, and also with him was Amr ibn al-As. He went to Al-Kufa, and it was a fertile ground. It started actually spreading in there. So he was able very easily to get a lot of followers among the people of Kufa. And the number that he was able to gather was 600 to 1,000. And he started basically spreading these rumors of these people, the points that I mentioned earlier. He went to Egypt, and he was able to get 600 to 1,000 followers. He went to Al-Basra, and he was also be able to get a similar number of followers. And they started spreading it in different parts. And the way they would do that, like what's happening in Egypt, by the way, today, they would start, their media industry would start basically spreading some rumors. First of all, to spread discomfort about the Khilafah of Uthman. Uthman did this, Uthman is not following the guidance of the Shaykhain of Abu Bakr and Umar. Uthman is giving special treatment to his own families. And most of the time, people mostly are followers. People just follow things, whatever they hear, without checking them. Like what's happening today. You see a piece of information, and you just follow it without even verifying it or questioning it. If it comes from somebody who knows how to present it. It's the same story that repeats itself. So a certain kind of environment of discomfort or dissatisfaction with Khilafah of Uthman started actually spreading. At that time, it started becoming problematic in Al-Kufa. And the one who was in charge of Al-Kufa was Sa'id ibn al-As, who was also from Banu Umayyah. But with him was Al-Qa'qa' ibn Amr al-Tamimi. Al-Qa'qa' was known to be a very tough person. When he saw people actually started spreading these rumors, what he did, and they were meeting in a certain masjid, he basically took a force and he surrounded the masjid. And he threatened them that if you do not stop, basically you will be punished severely. They said, we want to meet Uthman bin Affan and to discuss these problems with him. What do you want? They said, we don't want Sa'id ibn al-As, who was from Banu Umayyah, to be in charge of Al-Kufa. And he sent them to Uthman bin Affan alayhi radwanillah. Uthman bin Affan alayhi radwanillah, he was very tough on them from the beginning, and he sent them into exile in Bilad al-Sham, the Levantine area which was under the ruling of Muawiyah bin Abi Sufyan. And Muawiyah was very strong. There's an expression in Arabic called Sha'arat Muawiyah. Anybody heard of that expression? The hair of Muawiyah. What is that story of the hair of Muawiyah? Muawiyah used to say that there's one hair, just one hair, between me and the people. If they pull, I let go. If they let go, I pull strong. In other words, he's ruling based on, in light of the existing situation. That's why he was known to be a very skilled ruler. So Muawiyah basically, he kept them under firm control. So they complained to Uthman, send us to another place, until they ended up in a place, in the northern part of Arabia. And here they were kept also under control. So that actually stopped them there. Until the year 34 after the Hijrah. That's when the things started actually developing to a much worse situation. The year 34 after the Hijrah, then at that time, Uthman bin Affan felt the situation is deteriorating. So he gathered in the Hajj his umara, his leaders. And he consulted with them. What do you think I should be doing to the people? They want to isolate me, they said, you do not respond to them, and you have to be strong and tough with them. And Uthman bin Affan, he said to them, no, I will be lenient with them. So he asked them, what do you want? We don't want actually Sa'id ibn al-As to be in charge of Al-Kufa. He said, fine, I'll remove him. Who do you want instead? They said, Abu Ubaidah Amr ibn al-Jarrah. He said, I'll put him in charge. But subhanAllah, later on, they came and they asked for that also to be removed. This is the way it was with the Kufa actually at that time. And he said to them, I will give you whatever you want. And he said, I'm going to say it in Arabic because it's beautiful and I will translate. And he said to them, أما والله فقد أمرت عليكم من اخترتم وأعفيكم من سعيد والله لأفرشنكم عرضي ولأبذلن لكم صبري ولأستصلحنكم جهدي فلا تدعوا شيئا أحببتموه لا يعصى فيه الله إلا سألتموه حتى لا يكون لكم حجة. That he said that I will give you my honor, you can insult me as much as you want. I will exercise my patience for as much as you want. And if you want anything that does not involve a disobedience of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, I will give it to you. Because this was his approach, is to be lenient, hoping that this, of course, will contain the situation. Now keep in mind, hindsight is very sharp. We can look back and say it didn't work with them. But of course at that time you cannot pass that judgment. This was his own ijtihad. He thought that by doing such he'll be able to contain them. But subhanAllah, the way it is with evil people, you give them one, they ask for the second. It never works this way. And that's exactly actually what happened. So when their numbers kept on increasing further and further, they decided to meet in Al-Madinah the year 35 after the Hijrah, during the month of Shawwal. So people came from different parts, from Egypt, especially these three areas where the people of the fitna, were actually gathered and concentrated: Egypt, Kufa, and Al-Basra. And their numbers, by the way, who made up actually the people of the fitna, just a note on the side, that most of the time it was people that have a lot of hatred toward Islam, people that have committed certain sins, people that have something personal against Authman bin Affan alayhi ridwanullah, and the majority which were ignorant people that just buy into whatever actually they hear. So what happened then, again, Abdullah ibn Saba and the likes of him were able to convince all the people of the fitna that we have to now remove Uthman bin Affan from leadership. Whatever he has given us is not sufficient. Of course, they were not after Uthman, they were after the whole image, the whole khilafah of the Muslims. That's what they were going after. But they thought that now we're going to ask for the isolation or for the removal of Uthman bin Affan. Anything less will be unacceptable. And that's exactly basically what they were after. So they decided again to meet in the month of Shawwal of the 35th year after the Hijrah. A group came out of Egypt, about 1,600 to 1,000, whatever actually number was gathered. And they left basically toward them, and they had their leader is Al-Ghafiqi ibn Harb. And with them was Abdullah ibn Saba. Al-Ghafiqi ibn Harb was an important name that will be coming shortly. The second group came from the Kufa, also in 4 groups, the same number, about 600 to 1,000. And also their leader, among the leaders, was Al-Ashtar al-Nuqa'i. And also a name to remember that we'll be revisiting again. And also the people of the Basra, the same thing. And among them was Hakim ibn Jabala, who was known to be actually one of the thieves at that time. These are the people of the fitna. Now, the interesting thing is that the people of Egypt, they want to remove Uthman from power, and they want Ali to replace him. The people of Al-Basra, they want to remove Uthman, and they want Talha to replace him. The people of Al-Basra, they want to remove Uthman, and they want Zubair to replace him. So all of them want to remove Uthman, but who will be his successor? That's where actually they differed among themselves. So they went into Medina. The people that were going actually to Hajj Shawwal, again keep in mind this is Shawwal, Dhul Qa'dah, Dhul Hijjah. They went actually in Medina. The people that were going to Hajj continued, and they stayed. The people of the fitna stayed in Medina. And they gathered, almost like 2,000 people, and they marched toward Medina. And they criticized Uthman bin Affan alayhi ridwanullah for certain things. Among them, or one of the major things, is that you're giving a lot of money to your own family members. How can you do that? This is not the money of the Muslims. And Uthman bin Affan alayhi ridwanullah, when he heard that they're accusing him personally, of course he didn't like that. And this is his right. It was his right to clear his image. Remember the story of Yusuf alayhi salam, when the king said, bring him to me, and he said, what happened to the women? He had to clear his image when he says, وَقَالَ الْمَلِكُ أُتُونِي بِهِ فَلَمَّا جَاءَهُ الرَّسُولُ قَالَ ارْجِعْ إِلَى رَبِّكَ فَاسْأَلْهُ مَا بَالُ النِّسْوَةِ اللَّاتِي قَطَّعْنَ أَيْدِيهِنَّ أَنَّ رَبِّي بِكَيْدِهِنَّ عَلِيمٌ. That go and ask about the women. He had to clear his image. It is his perfect right. So Uthman bin Affan alayhi ridwanullah, he gathered the people of the fitna and the Sahaba alayhi ridwanullah, and he said, أُشْهِدُكُمُ اللَّهِ مَنْ فِيكُمْ حَضَرَ تَبُوكَ. I ask you by Allah, who among you witnessed Tabuk, the battle of Tabuk? Many people said that we did. And he said, Didn't you remember that the Prophet ﷺ said, whoever provide for the army of Al-Isra, the army of Tabuk, that I guarantee Al-Jannah for him? They said, yes, he said that. And he said, who provided the army of Tabuk, of Al-Usra? They said, you did. And he said, subhanAllah, someone who has given all of his wealth will not extend his hand to a money that is not his. And he said, and also I ask you by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Then the Prophet ﷺ said, whoever buys the well of Aruma, that I will guarantee Al-Jannah for him. It was a time where there was a drought and there was this big well that was owned by a Jewish person in Medina. And the Prophet said, whoever buys that well and offers it to the Muslim, I will guarantee Al-Jannah for him. And he said, who bought that well? They said, you did. He's the one that bought this well and offered it to the Muslim. And he says that I'm not the one that would extend my hand to the money of the Muslims. Yes, I give money to my family members, but it is all from my personal money. I never extended my hand to anything that is not personally mine. Authman bin Affan was known to be a very rich person. So they told him, but Umar used to be very tight when it comes, money-wise, when it comes to his own family members. And he said, yes, he was doing it to get close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I was getting close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala using a different means by giving my family members. What is wrong with that? I'm making it easier for my family members for my own money. It is his perfect right, and it is something that he was to be praised for, alayhi radwanillah. Then everybody actually kept quiet. Then the Sahaba, alayhi radwanillah, when the people of the fitna, 2,000 people, were about to instigate some further problem, then Ali radiallahu anhu and Talha and Zubayr, basically they raised their weapons, their sword. And they said, if you do not leave right away, if you do not stop, we will attack you. And then with these two things, Uthman clearing the misconception, and the Sahaba taking a strong stand, the people of the fitna basically were convinced of leaving. So they left. The people of Egypt left first, and then the people of Al-Basra and Al-Kufa. And everybody left until in the middle of the night, of that same night, then the people of Medina were surprised by seeing the people of the fitna coming back, shouting and screaming with their weapons and taking charge of Medina, all of Medina. Then Ali radiallahu anhu, he went there to check what happened. Then the people of Egypt, which were last, first the Kufa and the Basra left, and the people of Egypt who left after them, they said that we caught a messenger from Uthman bin Affan going to the leader of Egypt, saying to the leader of Egypt, when this message of mine gets to you, kill all the people of the fitna. It was a lie. And Ali ibn Abi Talib, he said, then what about the people of Kufa and Al-Basra? How did they know about this message? Because they left ahead of you. So supposedly they were way ahead going to Iraq. How did they find out about this message and came back? And he said this was something that was planned in Medina before you left. So he knew of actually their own intention. And with that, the people of the fitna took over Medina. The people of fitna with that took over Medina. And Uthman bin Affan radiallahu anhu, in the first Jumu'ah, after the people of the fitna took over Medina, he went out to the salat as usual, and of course praying behind him were the Sahaba and the people of the fitna. SubhanAllah, some people, you don't know how they could justify it to themselves. And he stood up, alayhi radwanillah, and he said, he praised Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and he said, Ya ha'ula'i al-uda. He says, O transgressing people, Allah, that I warn you of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. فَوَاللَّهِ إِنَّ أَهْلَ الْمَدِينَةِ لَيَعْلَمُونَ أَنَّكُمْ مَلْعُونُونَ عَلَى لِسَانِ مُحَمَّدٍ صَلَّى اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ وسلم. That the people of Medina know that you are cursed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as foretold by the Prophet Muhammad alayhi salatu wasalam, referring to the hadith of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam, where he said that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala curses anyone that conquers Al-Madinah. So he was not afraid of them, alayhi radwanillah. But then he gathered the Sahaba alayhim radwanillah and he consulted with them. What do you think I should be doing? Should I give them what they asked for? And he was willing to do that. And that if you ask me to give in, I will step down. And all of them, Talha, Zubayr, Ali, Sa'ad, Abdullah ibn Abbas, Abdullah ibn Umar, all of them said that you will not give in. You do not give in. It has its sacredness. This leadership has its own sacredness. So it's not whoever basically asks you to step down, then you will step down. And then Ibn Abbas said, Ya Amir al-Mu'mineen, لا تنزع قميصا قمصك الله إياه أو كلما غضب قوم على خليفتهم عزلوا. That a shirt that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given you to wear, you do not take it off. Meaning the leadership. And Uthman alayhi ridwanullah had heard the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam saying to him, trying to look up the hadith, saying the same thing, that the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam, this is a hadith narrated by Ahmad al-Tirmidhi and Hassanahu ibn Majah, he said that the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam said to Uthman before he died, إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَعَلَّهُ يُقَمِّصُهَ قَمِيصًا فَإِنْ أَرَادَكَ أَحَدٌ عَلَى خَلْعِهِ فَلَا تَخْلَعَهُ. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala may give you a shirt, meaning a position, later on. And if a person forces you to take it off, do not take it off. So the Prophet ﷺ foretold him that you do not give in. And then the Prophet, then Uthman bin Affan alayhi ridwanullah, when he found out that the situation is getting worse, then he sent messages to the different leaders that he had at different places, basically asking them to come and then save Al-Madinah. So he sent a message to Al-Kufa, to Al-Basra, to Muawiyah alayhi ridwanullah, and of course immediately Muawiyah and the others, they dispatched a big army marching toward Medina to decide as to save the Khilafah from actually the events that were happening in there. And then what happened when Uthman alayhi ridwanullah basically started speaking on the minbar against the people of the fitna, then the Sahaba alayhi ridwanullah wanted to defend him with their sword. And Uthman alayhi ridwanullah at that time, he told them that anyone that has pledged loyalty to me should not raise his sword. Uthman did not want anyone to die for his own sake. You know, imagine what's happened. Compare that to what's happening in Syria, what happened in Egypt and Libya and in Yemen and all the other places. They were willing to destroy the whole country actually for their own position. So Uthman alayhi ridwanullah, of course, I mean, there's not even room for comparison. You should not even compare the two. You know, but Uthman alayhi ridwanullah, he did not want any life to be wasted saving his own life. That's why he said clearly to the Sahaba that anyone who sees that I have power and command over them should not raise his sword. He does not want any of the Sahaba to be killed or anybody else to be killed, actually saving his own life. Then the Sahaba, of course, felt in a very bad situation, and the people of the fitna started throwing stones on Uthman bin Affan when he was on the minbar. One of the stones hit Uthman bin Affan and he fainted. So they took Uthman bin Affan alayhi ridwanullah to his own house. And then, of course, when the situation get worse, then the Sahaba alayhi ridwanullah, they wanted to defend Uthman bin Affan, but Uthman insisted that nobody is to defend me. But the Sahaba could not be quiet about these events. So what they did, then Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi ridwanullah sent Al-Hasan and Al-Husayn. He gave them their sword, and he said, you stand by the door of Uthman, protecting him. Zubayr ibn al-Awwam sent Abdullah ibn Zubayr. Talha ibn Ubaidullah sent Muhammad ibn Talha. So some of those young companions were sent to defend Uthman bin Affan, to make sure that the people of the fitna will not actually get in there. And true enough, the people of the fitna, basically, they had surrounded the door of Uthman bin Affan alayhi ridwanullah. And they tried to break in, then these young Sahaba tried to defend them, and some of them were wounded, and they were able to kill several of the people of the fitna. Uthman bin Affan alayhi ridwanullah, when he heard of that, and the one leading these young Sahaba was Abdullah ibn Zubayr radiallahu anhu. Abdullah ibn Zubayr, then he went to Uthman bin Affan, and Uthman bin Affan told him, Man amaraka bihada? Who gave you the command to do that? Didn't I give you a clear command that you will not raise any sword defending me? And he said, all of you should leave. And they all left except Abdullah ibn Zubayr. Abdullah ibn Zubayr could not leave. He could not leave Uthman bin Affan without any protection. The people of the fitna were concerned that the armies that were dispatched by Muawiyah and Al-Muqdad and the others were coming. And they had to decide, they had to do something before the army reaches. Because if these armies basically reaches, they will be lost. That's when they decided that they will have to kill Uthman bin Affan. So before that, they were just thinking about isolating, removing him from power. But now they started talking about killing Uthman bin Affan radiallahu anh. And the siege of Medina by then had taken already 18 days. So 18 days, and the people of the fitna were in control of the Medina. Now what they decided to do, they did not want to kill him directly first, because they thought if we do it, then there'll be the big mess of revenge and blood and all of that. So they decided basically to starve him. So they decided to prevent any food or any water from entering the house of Uthman bin Affan radiallahu anh. And then the situation became very difficult. They started, him and his own family members basically started starving and no water more than anything else. Then at that time, then the mothers of the believers, of course, heard of that. The wives of the Prophet ﷺ. Then Habiba عنها, she took the initiative. She took some water and she hid it under her garment. And of course, she was all covered. Al-Mu'mineen, that's how they used to dress, covered completely from head to toe. So she had some water hidden under her garment and she went inside. They stopped her. In the most rude way. This is the wife of the Prophet ﷺ, Al-Mu'mineen, Habiba عنها. And they stopped her. What are you going in for? They said that Uthman bin Affan holds the trust of Banu Umayyah. That the tribe of Banu Umayyah, whenever they have any trust, they would leave it with Uthman. So the money of the orphans and the widows are with Uthman. I want to make sure that I take that and give it back to them. They said, no, you're lying. SubhanAllah, saying that to the wife of the Prophet. And they uncovered her. Took that garment off and they exposed the water. And she was riding on a camel. They hit the camel and the camel went and she was about to fall off. SubhanAllah, this is how much guts they had. That against the wife of the Prophet ﷺ. Uthman bin Affan, when he heard of that, then he gave an immediate command that the mothers of the believers are to leave Medina and to go to Mecca. All the mothers of the believers are not to stay in Medina. There's a big danger in there. These people stop at nothing. So anything could happen, and this is like the sacred line in there. The wives of the Prophet ﷺ. So all of them were to leave Medina. Aisha عنها, she asked her brother Muhammad bin Abi Bakr as-Siddiq to join her. And he said no. Muhammad bin Abi Bakr as-Siddiq was one of the people of the fitna. Subhanallah. That's how bad it got. He was with the rebels. And then, so she left after him. So Uthman bin Affan عنها, then what happened when he heard of that, he basically sent a message to the people in the Hajj that were performing Hajj at that time. And the people of Hajj, when they heard that, as soon as they finished the rituals of Hajj, then immediately toward actually Medina. So the people of Hajj marching toward Medina, and the armies that were dispatched also marching toward Medina. And the army of Muawiyah was about 3 days away from Medina in a place called Wadi Dhil Qura. That's why the people of the fitna, they felt that they had to do something quickly. So they could not basically wait for a long time. So that's when they decided basically to go in. What happened initially, they started a fire by the gates of the door of Uthman, which destroyed part of the house of Uthman itself, which made it easy to go in from any time, from any place. Then after that, people started basically go into Uthman bin Affan. Uthman عنها, they said to him that take off your leadership, leave the leadership, and we'll leave you alone. And he said, I will not leave it. And he said, they started talking badly about him. And he said, how can you say these things about me? And wallahi, my right hand, which I gave bay'ah to the Prophet with, since he said, subhanAllah, he said so beautifully, he said, since I gave bay'ah to the Prophet with my right hand, I never even touched my private parts with it. In honor of the Prophet ﷺ. And what you're doing is something that we will not even do in Jahiliyyah. Entering or breaking into a house without any haya, without any shame, knowing that there are women actually inside. Then one person came in, one of the people actually from Banu Layth, he broke in. And Uthman bin Affan, he said, where are you from? And he says, from Banu Layth. And he said to him, he reminded him that, aren't you from Banu Layth? Then the Prophet ﷺ make dua for you. And the man woke up and he says, yes, you're right. Then he left right away and he left all the people of the fitna. Then another person came from Quraysh and the same thing happened. He said that didn't the Prophet ﷺ praise you? And the man remembered and then he left afterward. And then they started throwing stones on him. And he said, he came out, who threw the stone? One of them, he said that it is Allah who threw the stone on you. And he said, you lied. If it was Allah, Allah would not miss me. In other words, you're the one. Again, arguing with them using their own ways. Then, at the end, basically they entered. Three of them actually broke in. Al-Ghafiqi ibn Harb, Saudan ibn Hamran al-Sukuni, and Qutayra al-Sukuni, and then some others, they broke in. And when they broke in, they found Uthman bin Affan عنها, reading from the sheets of the Quran. An old man. He was in his 80s عنها. Someone who was really old with a lot of presence, a lot of nur coming out of his face, reading the Quran, so they stopped. Then they could not do anything. Then Al-Ghafiqi ibn Harb, he said to them, why did you stop? They said, look at him. How can we do anything to him? Then immediately he grabbed a piece of metal and he hit him with it. He hit him with that piece of metal and he kicked the Quran with his own foot. And he says, then Uthman bin Affan started bleeding, alayhi ridwanullah, and the Quran fell in his lap. And then few drops of his blood fell on the verse from Surah Al-Baqarah, فَسَيَكْفِيكَهُمُ اللَّهِ, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will take care of them for you. And this, some people said that it's still actually there in Turkey, actually, in a certain museum in Turkey, the verse that says, فَأَنْ آمَنُوا بِمِثْلِ مَا أَمَنْتُمْ بِهِ فَقَدْ اهْتَدَوْا وَأَنْ تَوَلَّوْا فَأَنَّمَا هُمْ فِي شِقَاقٍ فَسَيَكْفِيكَهُمُ اللَّهُ وَهُوَ السَّمِيعُ الْعَلِيمُ, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will take care of them. SubhanAllah, the historians, they said, every single person that participated in the siege of Uthman died killed. They were killed. None of them actually died a normal death, but all of them actually were killed, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala fulfilled that. Then Naila, the wife of Uthman bin Affan alayhi ridwanullah, when she saw the attack on Uthman, she tried to protect him. So she stretched her own hand and they cut her finger, alayhi ridwanullah, and they even stabbed her in her back. Then Qutayra, then Saudan actually jumped on Uthman bin Affan alayhi ridwanullah, and he stabbed him 9 times. And he said, 3 of them are for the sake of Allah, and 6 of them are for myself. And he was lying. All of them are for his sake. None of that could be for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He stabbed him. Khalifat Rasulullah, that the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam praised so much, he stabbed him 9 times. And then Qutayra, just to make sure that he died, that Uthman died, he said he put his sword on his chest and he leaned on the sword, pressing it until he died. Then one other person, he said that he jumped on the chest of Uthman until he smashed all of his ribs. So in that brutal way, Khalifat Rasulullah alayhi salatu wasalam, Amir al-Mu'mineen was killed. With that brutal way. Some people inside the house of Uthman bin Affan tried to defend him. Like his servants tried to defend him, but of course they ended up killing some of them. But with that Uthman bin Affan alayhi ridwanullah was killed. And Naila was wounded, and the Sahaba alayhi ridwanullah could not do anything. Everything was in the hands of the people of the fitna. SubhanAllah, this is the person that the Prophet ﷺ gave the glad tidings that he will be of the people of Al-Jannah. This is the person that the Prophet ﷺ said, أحياكم عثمان, يعني أكثركم حياء عثمان, that nobody has more haya than Uthman alayhi ridwanullah. This is the son-in-law of the Prophet ﷺ twice, alayhi ridwanullah. Someone that the angels feel haya from because he has so much haya, alayhi ridwanullah. Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi ridwanullah, when he heard of that, then he started saying, La hawla wa la quwwata illa billah, rahim Allahu Uthman, that may Allah have mercy upon Uthman. And he said that the people basically were unjust to you, and may Allah curse them, subhanahu wa ta'ala. And of course, and then after that, they started basically looting the house of Uthman. They took everything. They did not leave anything, including actually some of his own personal garments. They took everything and they did not leave anything. Now here there are 2 different stories as to what happened next. We'll talk about the burial of Uthman next time. But here that Naila alayhi ridwanullah, one of the stories said that she took her fingers, her cut fingers, and the shirt of Uthman that is covered with blood, and then off toward Bilad al-Sham, toward Muawiyah alayhi ridwanullah. And then in front of everybody in the masjid, then she raised her fingers and the shirt of Uthman, and she said to him, Anta waliyu dami, you are in charge of my blood, for what happened to Uthman bin Affan alayhi ridwanullah. Meanwhile, the event started actually even brewing further inside of Mecca, especially after knowing what happened to Amir al-Mu'mineen Uthman bin Affan alayhi ridwanullah, which started another camp. Try to imagine step by step how the big fitna developed. It didn't stop in here. It is still actually progressing. And it's progressing actually to get even worse than what is happening, until it led to fighting among the Sahaba alayhi ridwanullah due to the confusion and the instigation of the people that want nothing to do with the Muslims, that wish no good for the Muslims. This is the story that repeats itself all the time. And like I said, you can easily look back and say this should not have happened. But at the time you could not tell. At the time, Uthman bin Affan alayhi ridwanullah did the best that he could. Nobody has a better judgment than Uthman alayhi ridwanullah today. Nobody can claim to have a better judgment than Uthman bin Affan. But you cannot foretell the future. That's really what happened. You cannot look back and say this should have happened or should not. So we'll discuss inshallah next time. We'll continue what happened, which led basically to a whole army forming inside Mecca, led by Aisha radiallahu anha, Talha and Zubair, opposing an army that was developing in Medina led by Ali ibn Abi Talib radiallahu anhu. Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Remember what he said, that Uthman bin Affan alayhi ridwanullah had given clear instructions to the Sahaba that I don't want any one of you to raise a sword. I don't want any one of you to raise any weapon, any sword. So what happened, remember that Uthman bin Affan alayhi ridwanullah was very adamant that no one is to raise a sword in defense of myself. That nobody was to defend me. Because he did not want any life to be lost for his own sake, in defense of his own. That's why the Sahaba alayhim ridwanullah did not participate. The Sahaba did not participate for that reason. Because he said, anyone that believes that I'm his leader should obey me. Well, at that time, first of all, it happened in the middle of the night. So in other words, it happened suddenly, without any prior anything. And Uthman bin Affan, was clear that no fighting is to happen for his sake. So he was of the opinion that he will give them whatever they would ask for.
And how big was the invading army?
2,000, about 2,000 people. Yeah, they were able to take over Medina, 2,000 people. And that lasted for some time, 18 days until actually the killing of Authman bin Affan.
They were in Medina
18 days.
18 days?
Yes. No, he was not killed. Abdullah ibn Zubayr, he lived long time actually until the time of Al-Hajjaj ibn Yusuf al-Thaqaf. That's when he died. Abdullah ibn Zubayr, of course, was the grandson of Abu Bakr as-Siddiq. Right? He was the son of Zubayr ibn al-Awwam and Asma bint Abi Bakr. Abu Bakr as-Siddiq ridwanullah is the only one that had 4 generations of Sahaba. Anyone can name one in each generation. There was only one Sahabi that had, you had 4 generations of Sahaba related to that Sahabi. In other words, all of them met the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. And that was Abu Bakr as-Siddiq. His father, Abu Quhafa, was a Sahabi. Of course, he was a Sahabi. His children, Aisha, Asma, Abdullah and Muhammad were Sahaba. And the son of Asma and Zubayr, Abdullah ibn Zubayr, also he was a Sahabi. Abdullah ibn Zubayr, by the way, he was the son of Asma. And he was, of course, the nephew of Aisha, alayhi ridwanullah. That's why, and Aisha is the one that raised him. That's why Aisha sometimes is nicknamed as Abdullah. Even though she didn't have any children, where did Abdullah come from? It was Abdullah ibn Zubayr. She was the one that raised him. So Abdullah ibn Zubayr was raised in the house of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. And he lived for a long time actually until later on. Even Asma bint Abi Bakr lived for a long time until she was over 100 actually. Yes. Well, I think you answered your own question. Let me repeat. This is an important question that sometimes we get bombarded basically by saying the reason the Muslims are really being killed and tortured is because basically they're not following the Sunnah of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. And well, what about these? These are Sahaba alayhim ridwanullah. Wallahi, here I think sometimes we over-exaggerate the self-blame and the self-bashing into saying that the Muslims are bad. And almost sometimes we say that what's happening to the people, to the Muslims elsewhere in the world, almost like they deserve it because they kept away. Now this is wrong to say. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sends the fitnas and the tribulations for a certain reason. What's happening, first of all, any change comes as a result of a cause and effect. So if a person did not prepare for victory, he would lose. It doesn't mean that the fact that we are Muslims, everything will be guaranteed to us. So that's why, it's a cause and effect that applies to the Muslims and the non-Muslim. SubhanAllah, interestingly, somebody said to Ali ibn Abi Talib radiallahu anhu, he said to him that how come people did not divide or fight at the time of Umar radiallahu anhu, but they're fighting during your khilafah? Some people are so negative like that, look at your khilafah, so much fighting and happening. And Ali said, because Umar was leading people like me, but I'm leading people like you. That's really what happened. I think this usually puts it really in the proper perspective, that the people basically they become of a different quality. So it was not only the Sahaba, it was something else. But at the same time, we should not exaggerate the fact that, the Muslims are bad today, they're bad people, that's why this is happening to them. No, Allah sends the tribulation for different reasons. Sometimes you may not understand why things are happening. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has His own reasons, and the punishments and the reward that are happening in this world are not a measure of how much Allah is satisfied or dissatisfied with you. The famous story in Surah Al-Fajr, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, فَأَمَّا الْإِنسَانُ إِذَا مَا ابْتَلَاهُ رَبُّهُ فَأَكْرَمَهُ وَنَعَّمَهُ فَيَقُولُ رَبِّي أَكْرَمَنِ. That the person, Allah says, فَأَمَّا الْإِنسَانُ, that's what the human thinks. That if Allah gives him something, he will say, oh, فيقول ربي أكرمن, Allah likes me. وأما إذا ما ابتلاه فقدر عليه رزقه فيقول ربي أهانن. That if Allah basically makes things difficult for him, he will say, oh, Allah dislikes me. And then comes the answer in the next verse. Allah says, كلا بل لا تكرمون اليتيم. No, this is not correct. What's happening in this world is not a measure of how much Allah likes you or dislikes you. Otherwise, Allah likes us all more than He likes Authman bin Affan, right? If this is the measure. I mean, who can claim that? So what happens in this world is this is not a place of reward and punishment. The reward and punishment will happen in the hereafter. How would you explain the fact that you and I have such an easy life when the Prophet himself, don't go to Uthman, the Prophet himself had a difficult life. I mean, he used to be poor, he used to have difficult life, he lost many family members. So does that mean that Allah likes you? Rabbi Akraman, Allah likes me more than He likes the Prophet? Of course not. So what's happening in this world is not a measure of how much Allah likes someone or dislikes someone. That's why that may have some truth, but I don't think we should make it as a general or absolute statement and get too much into self-bashing. Too much, the Muslims are bad. That's why, brothers, the Muslims are being killed, because they became bad people. They strayed away from the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. This is not a good address. Well, I think, is this the first fitna that happened? I'm sorry. After the death of the Prophet ﷺ, there were other instances. Of course, I think probably the first one after the death of the Prophet is a ridda. The apostasy that happened after the death, during the Khilafah, and the beginning of the Khilafah of Abu Bakr as-Siddiq. This was a big time fitna. Actually, that fitna affected the religion itself. In other words, the religion, started basically, so people started leaving the zakat and the salat out of the religion. So this was one of them. The other one that happened, of course, also is in the beginning of the Khilafah of Authman bin Affan radiallahu anhu. If you remember, we discussed that many people, that they thought after the death of Umar alayhi ridwanillah, that now the strong man is gone, so we don't have to pay zakat anymore, you don't have to pay jizya anymore. But of course, Uthman was able basically to bring them back into the folds of, force them back into the folds of the Khilafah. So it was not the first fitna, but it's probably the biggest one. Definitely the biggest one. No, of course, the Sahaba, all of them, if you remember, all of them, they said to Uthman, you stay where you are. See, people sometimes, how should I say? Some people sometimes can be more royal than the king himself, the expression. أكثر ملكية من الملك, يعني. We say that. In other words, more Alawis than Ali himself. Of course, Ali, Talha, and Zubayr, would reject anything that is done by these people, anything that is suggested by these people. That's why they themselves, very strongly, they told Uthman that you have to remain in the Khilafah. You have to remain in the leadership. You cannot, there's a sanctity and sacredness of the leadership. You cannot just give in whenever somebody claims anything. That's why they would not give in. Wallah, subhanAllah, one of the historians here, Uthman bin Khamis, that spoke about the fitna, he said that the people of the fitna, they're never satisfied by the people of the Kufa, they're never satisfied by anybody. That's why first they ask Sa'id to be removed. And then after that, they say, Abu Musa al-Ash'ari, and then even that they asked for him to be removed. That's why whoever actually was in leadership, they would ask to be removed. Now keep in mind, the real story here is not Uthman bin Affan. The real story is the problem with the Muslims themselves. So they want to instigate problems, regardless. So even if all the people of the fitna have agreed on one person, they would still actually create problem for that person. So their goal is that Uthman was giving them what they were asking for. And he said that to them, I'll give you whatever you ask for. But still they would not actually be satisfied. Because their aim is something bigger than that, bigger than Uthman himself, alayhi ridwanillah. Yeah, they were Muslims. Jazakumullah khair. That's a good question, wallahi. Were they Muslims? Yes, they are Muslims. Despite what they did, but they still consider to be Muslims. They're bad Muslims, very bad Muslims. That's why, by the way, here, the belief of Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah is that a sin that a person commits, no matter how grave it is, does not make someone a kafir. If a person commits a sin, no matter how grave a sin that might be, he will be a bad person, he will be punished, he will be tortured, but it does not make him a kafir. That's why, the scholars, again, of Ahl Sunnah al-Jama'ah, that do not consider al-Khawarij, which will be coming later on, which are the ones that killed Ali ibn Abi Talib himself, and some of the Sahaba, we do not consider them to be kafir. despite the fact that they've done some bad things, and despite the fact that they have committed they have some deviations. You know, Khawarij, they consider the person who commits a major sin a kafir. That's what the Khawarij believe. We do not believe in that. We do not believe that the person who commits a sin, no matter how major it is, becomes a kafir. So long as he believes in the shahada and everything that is connected to the shahada. The statement of Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah. Wallahi, you know, like I said, I think you can criticize, you can say, you know, he could have asked the Sahaba to do that. But I think criticize may not be the right probably expression. Yeah, no, the reason is, like I said, because now we know what the situation developed into. We know what happened later on. So you can look back and say, this should not have happened because this led to that. But at the time, none of these events have happened yet. And he had a different assessment of the situation. Yani, see, it's a fitna. You know, and by the fitna, by definition, fitna is hazy. You cannot tell the truth from the falsehood. You cannot tell actually what the situation might develop into. All what Uthman was seeing at that time, if you put these different parts together, is that a big fighting was about to happen in Medina, and some major killings was about to happen. If the Sahaba fight with the people of the fitna, then many of the Sahaba will be killed in the process. And many people like that will be killed, many Muslims will be killed. So he wanted to protect, basically, to save any life. So that was his goal, alayhi wa sallam. Again, you can easily say it shouldn't have happened this way. But you know, I think this is not a fair statement to make. You know, because now we have the fact and we know what the situation became later on, what happened later on. So in light of that, that's really what we're making that judgment, which is not a fair statement to make. Yes, of course, but things don't move that quickly. That's why Authman bin Affan, when the people of the fitna started basically becoming more aggressive, you know, then he sent the message to Muawiyah and to the yes, he did, that basically we need support, we need fight, we need help. And an army was dispatched from those areas. Uthman bin Affan, Muawiyah, and Al-Qaqa himself basically came with a big force actually from Iraq, Al-Qaqa ibn Amr al-Tamimi. It's actually, the narration says the fingers of Na'ila, the wife of Na'ila, that she tried to defend him. Basically, she stretches her hand. They were about to stab him, so she stretched her hand, and they cut her finger. Wallahi, there was something, I'm not really sure how authentic that narration is, that the fingers of Na'ila were the ones that were cut. And that was the message, by the way, of Uthman bin Affan, that basically when Ali ibn Abi Talib visited with him in one of the instances during the siege of his house, he said to Ali ibn Abi Talib specifically that basically the power is not in your hand. Power is in the hand of the people of the fitna. So apparently there was not probably a big strong force actually in Medina, and he was concerned that the Sahaba would be killed as a result. Wallahi, there was a narration, yes, that was there, that he was. And actually in his last khutbah, he was like indicating almost that, basically that your Khalifa will be a good person and obey your Khalifa that will come after me. So as if he felt of his imminent death, alayhi wa sallam. Yes. The references, like I said, there's a Tabari, and Ibn Kathir, which are not, by the way, the best sources, like I said, for the reason that I mentioned. Because Tabari mentions everything, but of course, he cited his references, One good reference, actually, in that regard, and I would say if you were to get one, I would say that one, which is Tarikh al-Islami by Mahmoud Shakir, which is a series, actually, a series. And he mentions that, with an authentication of the references, and he's considered to be a far more credible, even though he's contemporary, by the way, he lived in the 20th century. He was far more credible as far as a source of history than even some of the earlier historians for that reason. About the fitna specifically, Salabi actually has written some really great writings actually about the fitna, and this is like his area of expertise. Another one is this book called Huqba min al-Tarikh by Uthman al-Khamis. This also is a good reference. Another one is Al-Awasim min al-Qawasim, which is also a classic actually when it comes to specifically the sources of the fitna. We mentioned his children, if you remember actually early on. I gave a list of his children, I think 2 lectures ago or something. I mentioned his wives and his children as well. Muhammad bin Abi Bakr, he was with the people of the fitna, subhanallah, the son of Nuh alayhi salam was a kafir, but afterward he regretted, Allah accept the tawbah, the repentance, but he was, and by the way, what happened, Muhammad bin Abi Bakr, when people started entering the house of Uthman before his death, Muhammad bin Abi Bakr had entered before, And Uthman bin Affan blamed him. He says, are you with them? How can you be with them yourself? The son of Abu Bakr as-Siddiq with them. And then Muhammad bin Abi Bakr, then he held back and he left. He did not actually stay in the house. But subhanallah, shaitan can tempt anybody. Wallahi, yeah, that's why it is good. Yeah, it's not guaranteed to anybody. Perseverance is not guaranteed to anybody. That's why we ask Allah protection. طيب جزاكم الله خير سبحانك اللهم بحمدك نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر